Welcome on. It is a Wednesday Locked On Syracuse podcast. Tim Leonard, Tyler Aki here with you, and we've got a little bit of a break until the Miami game, so we will dive into some of the recent comments from Jim Boeheim on who's coming back next year, or more specifically, who is not coming back next year, I guess. Also, hinted at maybe playing some man-to-man, which I thought was a joke at first, but apparently he did have a quote that said that, so we'll discuss that. And we'll dive into the ACC tournament draw because things are starting to clear up in that regard a little bit. That's all coming up on the pod today.
You are Locked On Syracuse, your daily podcast on the Syracuse Orange, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Happy to have you with us. Thank you for making us your first listen or your first watch of the day, I guess, too. If you're on YouTube and you're doing it that way, smash the like button, subscribe to YouTube if you haven't already. You can subscribe to the podcast wherever you get your podcast and follow us on Twitter at LO_Syracuse. Today's episode of Locked On Syracuse is brought to you by Run Your Pool. We're into March now, so March Madness is here. And Run Your Pool has a better way to create your bracket. RunYourPool.com, the premier sports pool hosting service. So speaking of brackets, ACC Tournament Brackets starting to shape up a little bit. And Syracuse has been locked into the 8-9 matchup. We don't know if they're the 8 seed or the 9 seed yet. But with that loss last night, they are definitely going to play in the 8-9 matchup for the second straight year. That means their first game is Wednesday at noon. And it's looking pretty likely that they will play Florida State, barring some big shakeup there. There's a couple teams behind Florida State that are sort of in a logjam in the 10, tied for 10th in the conference, but Florida State has a lead there right now. So looking like Florida State first round, and then looking like Duke, unfortunately, if they win the first round game, because I would imagine Duke will beat UNC. Duke has Pittsburgh before that. That's tonight as of us recording. It seems like they're on their way to locking up the ACC regular season title and getting that 1 seed. So that's pretty much how it's going to shake out here, it seems like.
And even if Duke doesn't beat UNC, still a decent shot that they do get that number 1 seed in the ACC as well. Yeah, the path seems like it is what it is at this point. You're probably going to face Florida State, which I think Syracuse, it's a good matchup for them. Florida State is absolutely depleted in terms of a body standpoint because they've lost 3 of their best players for the season pretty much. So that may not be a terrible matchup for you, but you're going to have to play Duke at some point. You're going to have to beat Duke if you want to be taken seriously in this thing too. So would you rather get them out of the way early? Would you rather maybe catch them off a little bit of rust between their game against Carolina and then into the what would that be, the Wednesday or Thursday matchup of the ACC tournament? So would you rather try to maybe take advantage of a little bit of rust there? Listen, Duke's not going to be a good matchup for you no matter how you slice it, but you're probably going to have to beat them if you want to be taken seriously. And listen, I don't think this is you can beat Duke and pull off a couple more wins. No, this is you have to win the ACC tournament sort of deal if you want to get into the NCAA tournament. That's where we are. Some people tweeted at us like, oh, if they beat Duke and then get to the championship game, they'll probably be in or they'll be on the bubble. No, you still got quite a ways to go from there.
They definitely do. Honestly, my bigger worry going into the ACC tournament is, can they finish the season above 500?
Yeah.
You're not going to get in the NIT if you're below 500, of course. I don't really care about the NIT, but it would be a little disheartening to have your first losing season under Jim Boeheim. And right now they're 15-15. They have the Miami game left, which is kind of a toss-up in my opinion. We'll preview it later in the week, but whether you win that or not, you're probably going to get at least one loss in the ACC tournament unless you win the thing. So you kind of need to win the Miami game to put yourself in a position to finish at least above 500. It might just end up that they are smack dab at 500, and we'll see what they do, whether they have interest in going to the NIT from there or not. But it's not really NCAA tournament conversation for me. It's more, all right, can Jim Boeheim get to 1,100 wins in his career? He's 2 away from that. Can Jim Boeheim protect his long-standing record of never having a losing season.
And that's it right there. It's you're not playing to get into the NIT. You're playing for Coach Boeheim at this point. You're playing to protect his legacy here. I mean, this is a really, really impressive stretch. I mean, to go 45 plus years without having a sub 500 record, like that's really impressive. And that's something that these players should take a little bit of pride in is we don't want to be the team that let down a legend like that. You don't want to be, especially a team that's got two of his sons on it too. So that should be your sort of guiding force right now. It shouldn't be, oh, we're playing to get into the NIT. No, we're playing for our coach who's got an immense history, who brought us into this program. That's what we're playing for here to close out this season.
No doubt. So getting into Jim Boeheim's comments from last week on the coaches show last Thursday, he basically said that Jimmy, Buddy, Cole are all leaving. He's not planning on any of them coming back, which I think is like, you don't really need to say it right now, but also pretty much what we were expecting at this point. There was some talk of Jimmy getting a waiver, but I just feel like
I think if you asked me 2-3 weeks ago, would all three of them leave? I probably would have said, you might see one come back.
well, we knew Buddy was out, right? I mean, that's pretty much been in the works from the start, and Buddy's confirmed it even recently. Then Jimmy was probably the most likely. Cole was in the conversation. He had said some stuff. Maybe I'll come back. Maybe I'll not. But it seems like Cole approached Jim Boeheim before the year because this is what they have to do, and they have to tell recruits something. And he said, I plan to play 1 year. So I'm not that surprised by it. I guess this doesn't officially rule out the possibility of them coming back, but I think for all intents and purposes, we have to sort of plan that we're losing 3 starters in the offseason here. And then he said something like, we're looking to add a 6th guy. And he even said later on a separate thing, I think it was on a different press conference, like 6 or 7. So he has 5 freshmen already committed right now. Judah Mintz was at the Duke game. We got some tweets about this, how was that bad that Judah Mintz was there for the blowout? He tweeted that it was an awesome visit. I don't necessarily think the game result is going to sway his opinion. Put it this way, if he was thinking about coming to Syracuse, it's not like that is going to be the one thing that pushes him over the edge one way or the other, is that they lost to Duke. But I think what might sway his opinion is just the fact that he saw the atmosphere. That's the cool thing about being at the Duke game. And that's an atmosphere that not a lot of other schools can provide.
And it was a great atmosphere, too. I mean, you heard Coach K say it. Jim Boeheim, after the Duke game, said the most disappointing part of the game was the fact that we had that sort of atmosphere and we lost in the fashion that we did. Like all those people that came out to come see this great basketball game, and it was a total letdown of a game. But you're right. I don't think the result of that game is going to matter one iota in the eyes of a Judah Mintz. In fact, dare I say it, I think it may only help. Because a lot of the ways that these kids sometimes look at a result like that is, man, we're in this awesome environment. It's a historic program, a historic coach. I want to make sure that never happens again. And I think I can be the guy that can step in and make sure that doesn't happen again. We've heard recruits say that stuff all the time. So listen, I don't think the result of the game is going to matter all that much, but I think having the showcase of it all and the pomp and circumstance of that big time event, I think that matters way more. And then, of course, there's the relationship part of it with the assistant coaches and with Jim Boeheim. That's the important stuff, really, I think, in the recruitment of Judah Mintz.
Yeah, we'll put a pin in that conversation for just a second because a lot more to get to on that front looking ahead to next year's roster. But it is that time of year where a lot of people have pretty much given up on all of their New Year's resolutions. Not this year for me, though. I'm sticking to my resolution to eat right thanks to Built Bar. It almost feels like it's not really a resolution because I actually enjoy eating them. Finally, I found a protein bar out there that tastes good and is somehow good for you as well. Most Built Bars contain 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, 4 net carbs, and 17 grams of protein. Compare that to a candy bar, which usually has around 240 calories, 30 grams of sugar, and dozens of net carbs. Built Bars are somehow good for you and taste like a candy bar as well. You can go to built.com, use our promo code. That's locked15. Get 15% off your order. Again, our promo code is LOCKED15 for 15% off over at built.com. So it's interesting because now we're kind of at the point of the season where people are starting to think about next year a lot, right? And
Mm-hmm.
it feels like this happens every year where you talk yourself into, all right, next year will be better. Next year will be better. And usually I can subscribe to that theory. This year, it's tougher for me to get to it because it feels like next year's roster, given what we know of it right now, and I think Judah Mintz, there's a decent shot he comes, but it feels like they're a couple pieces away from even matching the talent level they had on this year's roster. I don't think people are prepared for the fact that next year's roster shouldn't be as good as this year's roster. And I'm a huge proponent of the reason why they struggled this year is lack of recruiting, lack of talent on the roster. But I also am a huge proponent of Buddy Boeheim has been underrated, if anything, at Syracuse.
Yeah.
And you're losing him and you're losing Cole Swider, who just scored 36. Hypothetically, I guess Jesse is going to maybe be even better next year. I guess Benny is the one that you point to and you say, if he takes a leap, then it's a different story. But to me, next year's team might be even worse than this year's team. And I don't think that's what everyone is prepared for right now.
I think it's too early. It's certainly too early to pass any sort of judgment.
I agree with that.
But there's certainly a lot more unknown. Like there was a lot of unknown heading into this season. Your roster construction was going to look like. What's Benny going to look like? How's Jimmy going to adjust to this? Are Cole and Samir ready to take a leap into a more prominent role with Syracuse? There's a lot of unknown there. Well, that's going to feel like chump change in comparison to what's coming next year. We mentioned there's 5 freshmen that are coming into this program. You might see a 6th freshman come into this program. You're probably going to see a handful of transfers as well, both in and out. So
right.
You're looking at a total roster overhaul, which is that for the better? I don't know. I mean, you look at, I think in certain spots, yeah, it's certainly going to help to get more athleticism into the program. I would guess this team is going to be better defensively next year. If you had to ask me right now, the team will be better defensively next year. But this offense could take an absolute nosedive. I mean, you brought it up with Buddy Boeheim, and I think you're right. He may even be underrated with how much he's shouldered for this team. Like, imagine this season without Buddy Boeheim, because you want to point to, oh, Cole has this great performance here, and Joe had this great performance here, and Jesse was great here. Some of that is due to the fact that Buddy Boeheim takes up a lot of the scouting report for opposing teams. And I think that's going to be something that's underappreciated for next season.
I mean, Buddy Boeheim just passed Ronnie Cycli on the all-time scoring list at Syracuse. Like, let's not forget that he took Syracuse pretty much as the main guy. I mean, definitely as the main guy. He carried them to a Sweet 16 last year.
He was one of the stories of the tournament last year.
Yeah, and
one
that's
of these
partly
stories of
because
the tournament.
The coach's son. I get that, but I don't know why the fan base is still hard on Buddy to the point that you think after last year that would have softened. He literally brought them to the Sweet 16 and stepped up in the ACC tournament, Virginia game, he got them to the tournament and then pushed them to the Sweet 16. Then he's second in the league this year in points per game. He's 0.3 points behind Alondas Williams right now in points per game. So I get it. Like, he takes a lot of shots. He has more of a leash. I still find it puzzling sometimes when I watch him do his back down move that it's still effective. Like, sometimes when I watch Syracuse, I think, why don't they just bring over a second defender and double Buddy there and try and force him? Because it's so methodical the way he gets to his spots, but he gets to them and he scores a lot. And he's not going to be on the team next year. And I don't think people understand that he is the MVP, no doubt, of this year's team. That conversation came up with Jesse Edwards. Jesse has clearly been very valuable. Jesse's right up there. I think he's probably number 2 is what we're finding out.
He's a hard firm 2, but he is not number 1.
Right. It's one Buddy, and then it's a new level, and then it's Jesse for me. And I don't know if everyone's on board with that take, but I think it's the coach's son. I think it's the last name. He does take some bad shots. Like, he's not perfect. He's maybe not quite as good. Like, it's probably a problem that he is your number 1 at times, but there's been several games this year where he has been the only guy willing to take shots. And when you don't have that guy next year, someone's got to take him. And I don't know who's going to take him on next year's roster right now as we look at it. It's still early, but
I don't know if the problem is that he's your number 1. I think the problem more so is that you don't know who number 2 is night in and night out. Is it going to be Joe one night? Is it going to be Jesse another night? Is it going to be Cole one night? Like, that to me is the problem. He doesn't have a Robin to the Batman right now. And if he had a more consistent number 2 who could elevate their game to a certain level night in and night out, I think that would do wonders for him. Because I think Buddy can be the best player on a team that gets to the Sweet 16. I mean, he's already been the best player on a Sweet 16 team, but I think Buddy can be the best player on a team that goes to the Final Four. Let's say he did come back next season. I think he could be the best player on a Final Four roster, but he needs help. He needs a lot of help out there. And I'm not going to sit here and say he's an empty calories player, because I don't think that's true, but he needs some help. He needs a running mate with him. And Joe hasn't been that for him. Cole hasn't been that for him. Jesse looked like he might be there, but at the end of the day, it's tough to do that when you're pairing a shooting guard with a center at that point.
Right.
So it's a tough combination there. He needed a little bit more help out of Joe this entire season. And if Joe Girard had been everything that Syracuse fans sort of wanted him to be when he stepped on campus, you'd be looking probably at a tournament team this year, and maybe one that could even make a deeper run.
So as we shift sort of into next year's team, that's another point that I think is important to bring up. Joe Girard is pretty much out shooting his standard this year from what we've seen at Syracuse. And he's still not satisfying the fan base. He's still had a lot of head scratching plays. He still is probably, if not just as good, maybe even a little bit worse than what he was as a freshman, right? And
the percentages are a lot better.
They are,
sure.
But
yeah,
I feel like he's pretty much
the head scratching
player.
play rate is about the same. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like he was a freshman and you were hoping he would take a leap, and that leap hasn't happened, is what I'm saying. And now he's a junior and he's going to be a senior next year. And it's pretty rare that a player takes a leap from his junior to senior season. I get that he had COVID sophomore year, and maybe you can make a case for him taking a step up when he has more volume next year. But I don't know. I don't really believe in him taking a leap. So I guess what I'm saying is you need someone, probably more than one person, to take a leap on next year's roster, whether it's Symir Torrance, Jesse Edwards, Benny Williams. Benny's the obvious candidate. Mm-hmm. Jesse probably can get even better. All these guys will probably, quote unquote, get better, but it's a lot to replace. And right now you're looking at a starting 5 that is probably Joe, Benny, Jesse for sure. And I would say then you get into, that's why we need a transfer portal ad, or we need a Judah Mintz to slide in there. And if you get Judah Mintz, maybe it's a little bit different of a conversation, but to me, it doesn't take them from bubble team to inside the tournament with Judah Mintz. Right. I think it takes them from off the bubble to maybe more on the bubble. That's really how I feel about next year's roster.
And even with Judah Mintz, like, who knows? I mean, think about some of the players who Syracuse has recruited in the past that are around his level of play. Bryson Goodine, Jalen Carey. None of those guys were guys that took Syracuse from being on the bubble into the tournament. So it's tough to say with how much a Judah Mintz would impact. Now, there's certainly players that are around his standing that in the past maybe not went to Syracuse, went to other schools that pulled them into the tournament. I mean, look at Notre Dame this year. Like Blake Wesley. If Notre Dame gets into the tournament, Blake Wesley is going to be a big reason why. And I think that's something that you look at. Okay, there are players that can elevate, but you also need to go out and perform at the end of the day. I think, to me, when you look at what this team needs to add or what needs to take the step up heading into the next season, it's the point guard play in general and not about Joe Girard. Because I think you're at the point now with Joe Girard, you know what he is. I think he can be effective as a 2, but you have to move him to the only way to move him to the 2 is if you find a 1, right? So you have to either really see some development in Symir Torrance that makes you confident that he's going to be your starting point guard next year, or you got to go out and find one, or you got to be confident enough that maybe Kadir Copeland can step in. But how often do you see a freshman point guard work out in college basketball? Very rarely. It's a very tough thing to do. I mean, look at the Kuzi list this year. Seniors everywhere on that list. So, and it's a down year too for point guards. I just think that the point guard position in general, I'm not going to say it's suffering, but it's different now. And a lot of it has to do with Steph Curry and Derrick Rose and Russell Westbrook. Like, these point guards want to score now. And that's why everyone is sort of a combo guard, it feels like, coming in. Now, you do find some exceptions to that rule that can be good facilitators, but the point guard position is just different than it was 5 years ago, 7 years ago, 10 years ago. And maybe that's why you're seeing the lack of true point guards in this day and age. But the point guard position has to get better. And the solution is not Joe. The solution is Samir, Kadir Copeland being the guy, or you go out and find one.
So before we move on to the man-to-man stuff, which I find interesting, we'll get to that in a second. This is all way too premature, way too early, and we understand that. But I feel like if you're listening to this podcast, you're a diehard
You're on
Syracuse
to next year.
fan.
Yeah.
If
you're a rational Syracuse fan, you're on to next year at this point, because whatever happens the rest of the way, like, wake me up on what day is the ACC Championship? Like, that's where I'm at right now. Wake me up on that Sunday or that Saturday, because that to me is the only thing that matters at this point.
So let's say the starting five is this: Joe Girard, Judah Mintz, Chris Bunch, Benny Williams, Jesse Edwards. So we're assuming Judah Mintz is added. Is that, to you, A, a bubble team, B, just outside the bubble, C, even like around this level team, or even worse? One of the three. Or you can say better than bubble. I don't know.
I mean, I'm not going to say a better than a bubble team, just because the glaring thing that I needed to see improve there was point guard. And I don't know if you necessarily address your point guard. I think there's more talent in that roster for sure, but I don't know if you address the need of point guard, that stability, that calming force that's going to help this team, because Judah Mintz is a good player, but is he going to be a good point guard? Or are we going to have to revert back to seeing Joe
He's
Girard
more
at the
that newer
guard?
point guard you're talking about, I think. From what I've seen in this game, he's probably not going to have as many head-scratching plays as Joe, hopefully, but I think he's more of a combo guard.
And listen, he could be a freshman who just tries to make a little too much happen at times. We've seen that happen. And I think the conversation is completely different, and someone is going to want to bash me upside the head when they hear this. But if Kadari Richmond is on this roster, it's a totally different team, because he's that true point guard. He's that true point guard. And people can point to his Seton Hall number. He's made a difference on that team. He has made a difference on that team. And I think it's also tough to judge someone too who is transferring schools, because sometimes it's tough to make an impact in that first year transferring, especially after being a freshman. But once you get to that second, third year, then you start to see the real deal. And I think you're going to start to see that next year with Kadari.
Yeah, I think they really need a transfer portal consistent scorer on the wing, or guard even. Just someone
those things don't grow on trees. Those things do not grow. Those things do not grow on trees either.
They don't, but
if they do, they're going to Duke, Carolina, Kentucky. I mean, that's the thing that Kentucky's adopted now. They're going for a lot of transfers these days. Like, they're going to some of these SEC schools or the Blue Bloods at that point. And I don't know if Syracuse is going to find their way into that conversation.
Well, I would say that of all the positions that we have recruited recently, I feel like that's been our best selling point. That's been our best success. Is there's been an Andrew White that's come in and been successful shooting the basketball. Now, you could point to maybe his defense, but he had a 40-point game at Syracuse. Was actually at the Chapel Hill game too, by the way. Yeah. But he is a success from the transfer portal ranks in his first year.
There's a lot of successes.
Alan Griffin, you could
I would say a success.
Yeah. I mean,
I know he took his lumps at the end of the year. I'd say largely a success. Elijah Hughes, success. John Gillen, success.
If we're looking at, all right, what have we done before to elevate our teams, and what can we do this offseason? I feel like that is definitely a priority for me. I could see it happening, and I just feel like the ball, like there needs to be a scorer on that roster. I know Girard is a scorer. I know Benny could blossom into that, but who are you giving the ball to? Who's getting you 18, 20 points a game? I know those don't grow on trees, but there's a sales pitch to be had there to a decent transfer portal player. There's going to be tons of players in the portal again. Can you convince one of them to come in and say, look, we've had success here. Our offense is pretty simple. We'll give you the ball. We'll let you go to work. And it's been a good track record here. Come on and join us, and you'll be a starter right away. I mean, that's the selling point you have to pitch, I think.
I think one of the things too, and you brought up his name, but Benny Williams has to blossom. I'm not saying he has to, well, if he can be your leading scorer next season, I think that's more of a good thing than a bad thing, because I think that more says that he went out, had a stellar offseason, and turned into a killer. I think that it'll say more about that than, wow, this team's so bad that Benny Williams is your leading scorer, because I think the worst case scenario next year is Joe Girard's your leading scorer. I think if that's the case, then you're going to be in for some trouble. But I think it's one of those things where if Benny's your leading scorer, I think it's more that he took a step than it is, wow, we're in dire times right now.
All right, March Madness is about 2 weeks away now. That means you need to start thinking now about where you're going to be running your brackets this year. Are you going for the usual, or are you looking for the best this year? We've done our homework here, and we're running our brackets with runyourpool.com. Along with standard brackets, Run Your Pool offers game types like Survivor or Pick X, both of them really fun. They have options to edit scoring, and they offer more intel to make your picks, all stuff you won't find at ESPN or CBS. If you've got a business, runyourpool.com can help you take some of that madness magic and play alongside your employees or even gain customers. Plus, they offer full white glove customer support, custom branding, and one of the easiest 3-minute setups you'll ever find. Clearly, we believe Run Your Pool. We believe in them because, like I said, we're running our brackets there ourselves. There's no truer test than that. If you want to play against us for a shot at a cash prize, join us at runyourpool.com/locked on. And while you're there, create your own pool for your friends and family. Enter Pure Madness at checkout for $10 off your custom pool. That's Pure Madness, all one word, for $10 off. All the rules and details will be available there. That's runyourpool.com/locked on for your chance to win a cash prize. We look forward to seeing and beating you there.
This episode is brought to you by Rock Auto. With the ever-increasing number of makes and models, it is impossible for your local auto parts store to stock all the parts that you need. So why endure often pointless or seemingly intimidating questioning and wait while the person behind the counter orders the parts on their computer with only the brand their warehouse happens to carry? You have computers and phones with access to rockauto.com at home and in your pocket. So save time and money when you use Rock Auto. Why choose to spend 30%, 50%, or even 100% more for the same parts from a chain store or car dealership? Rock Auto is a family business serving do-it-yourselfers for over 20 years, and their prices are always reliably low for every single customer. Go to rockauto.com right now and see all the parts available for your car or truck, and be sure to write Locked On in their How Did You Hear About Us box so that they know that we sent you. Again, write Locked On in their How Did You Hear About Us box so they know we sent you. Amazing selection and reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. Visit them at rockauto.com.
So another comment from Jim Boeheim this week. He was asked if in the future he will rethink playing 100% zone defense. He said,
Let me guess. Listener question.
No, I think Matt Park just asked him
Matt
this.
Park flat out asked him.
Well, actually, it might have been listener because I think it was during the Twitch part. I can't remember exactly because it's been a little bit, but however it happened, maybe it was a listener question.
If Matt Park asked him, because he's a veteran, he knows the questions you just can't ask Boeheim. If Matt Park asked him, it was something Boeheim planted to him before. Said, ask me.
Yeah, I don't know if I honestly don't remember at this point. It was definitely during the Twitch part, so maybe it was a listener question. Maybe someone can tweet at us and refresh our memory on that. But Boeheim's answer was that not with this group. They can never play man-to-man if we practiced it for 2 years, which I largely agree with. They're just not quick enough, really. But he said that man-to-man is something he might look into with the guys we have coming in next year. So I'm torn on this. One, he said this before, right? Like, it's not the first time he said, yeah, we might play some man-to-man this year, and it never happens. So I have my guard up. I understand the history of it. Two, you have to think that maybe he's starting to see even that shot Caleb Love hit where it's like they did everything right, but guys are just making that shot more. You have to think that part of him is thinking maybe if you have a more athletic group, working into man-to-man is possible. It's a tough one for me because I don't really take too much from it because it's more of a I'll believe it when I see it type of thing. But I do feel like next year's group could play man-to-man defense. And I do feel like if they did that even 20, 30%, it would help them.
I agree that obviously next year's group could play man-to-man. But isn't next year's group going to be perfectly equipped to play the zone? And listen,
you still got Joe Girard at the top.
You still have Joe Girard, but we've seen in the past too, where you can hide one guy. You can hide one guy in that zone. But if you've got 4 other guys that can play within your zone defense, like, I don't think the zone's a broken system per se. I just think it needs some tweaks here or there. And I think Jim Boeheim is open to that too. I mean, we've seen it play out obviously this year when he goes to the 1-1-3. So I think that this is a group that I think is going to make him rethink that a little bit. He's going to see the athleticism. He's going to see the bodies flying around defensively in those first couple weeks of practice. And maybe he's not going to play man. I don't think he's going to play man. I'm with you. My guard's always going to be up whenever he says something like that because of what we've seen in the past. But I think he's going to get creative because, yes, that Caleb Love shot, some of those Charlie Moore shots from earlier this year, like the 2-3 zone, the traditional 2-3 zone is not equipped to guard those, nor really should they have been. I mean, it's a tough shot, but at this point in basketball, those tougher shots are becoming more practiced and a little bit easier for some of these up-and-coming guards. But if you tweak things a little bit to account for some of those, I think it's smart, and I think it's still a usable system defensively. I'm not against playing the 2-3 zone. I just think that when you put the right pieces together, I think it can work again.
So the thing I would push back on that is you need 2 components to be good at the zone. You need athleticism, I'd say, and you need knowledge of the system. Like Benny Williams this year, I would say has been a little iffy in the 2-3 zone. That might get some pushback, but I think he is very athletic and he has the ability to recover and make those weak side blocks and do some flashy things. But if you really watch back the games, he's not in the right spot sometimes. When the center comes up, he doesn't fall back into the forward spot quick enough. And Boeheim has talked about how he just hasn't quite learned our system yet. He hasn't quite learned our 2-3 zone. You're talking 5 new freshmen, maybe some transfer portal ads, maybe even a 6th freshman with Judah Mintz. I'm a little worried that, and this is what I was worried about at the start of this year, where we've seen it now. When you have a lot of transfer portal additions, it was the NIT year with Andrew White. When you had a lot of transfer portal new faces come in this year, the zone was the worst it's ever been. That was a large part because of the athleticism. But I think athleticism is one phase. The next phase is just knowledge of the 2-3 zone. Benny should be better, but Benny's as athletic as they come, and it still took him some time to look good in the 2-3 zone this year.
You're right. It's certainly a 2-pronged attack here. I do think, though, like, you can't teach athleticism, but you can teach smarts and learning a system there. And I would much rather, like, I think the failures of the zone this season are more in part due to the lack of athleticism than maybe the newness that it is to a number of these players. And you can't fix athleticism, but you can fix your learning curve and just the practice that you get and your familiarity with the system. So that's why I'm a little more optimistic for next season from a defensive standpoint too. But you're right. It may be one of those things where there's hiccups early on, but you're not going to play nearly as tough of a non-conference schedule next season as you did this season. And B, you're going to have the guys with the unteachables.
We know, right?
Yeah. I mean, I don't envision Syracuse ever playing something like that. Was tough. That I'm not going to say it was like Gonzaga level tough of what they go through, but that was a non-conference schedule that can probably go toe to toe with most of them in the entire country this year. When you look at, I mean, you may have played 2 Final Four teams in your non-conference schedule. When you look at Auburn, when you look at Villanova, a team that can certainly go to the Final Four. So I don't expect them to have that sort of non-con, and they're also going to have the athleticism that is needed to play the zone. And I think that, to me, is enough to inspire a reason not necessarily to go to man-to-man, and B, some optimism for the defense to be much improved. Like, I'm talking, you may be able to slash your KenPom defensive efficiency in half next season.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if I'm all the way there. And again, we have to.
Now, don't get me wrong. That's not to say there aren't going to be holes on this team, because I'd expect your offensive efficiency to double from they're like top 20 right now. Like, if it's outside the top 50 next year, I wouldn't be surprised, and I don't think you would either.
And look, I think you hit on something earlier. This will be the last thing I say before we get out of here. Joe Girard, you can get away with one guy, but I'll just say this. If next year they have a top 70 defense on KenPom, that'll be the first time that Joe Girard has been on a Syracuse team and that's happened. So I'm not saying it's all Joe Girard. It's probably even overrated how much he contributes. It's probably more the forwards and the back line this year than anything for me. But it's going to be tough. You're behind the 8 ball initially when you don't have Frank Howard and Mike Benajay up top, or some of these good duos that we've seen with length. Like Joe Girard is trying, he knows the system, but it's the athleticism issue and the length issue at the top of the zone that he's just not as imposing as some of these other guys, like a Kadari Richmond, who would have been great, obviously.
Right. And your hope is that a Kadir Copeland can make up for that. Your hope is that Samir Torrance can get even better defensively the next season. Your hope is that the back line improves and you don't have to have Jesse scrambling corner to corner per se. You can get away with maybe some other things when you have more length, athleticism. And I think that's promising defensively, but I know that it's a double-edged sword. For as good as you might improve defensively, I don't think the offense is going to whatever you improve off or defensively, I think your offense is taking an equal step back to the defensive improvement.
Yeah, I agree. All right, well, we will get out of here. Lots to talk about tomorrow on the show. We'll keep you up to date on any recruiting news that comes out during the week, and we will get you ready for Miami as well later in the week. So thanks for listening today. Subscribe if you haven't already, and we'll talk to you guys tomorrow.